Serious. People who are no longer in contact with their parents, what was the final straw? My mom and dad split when I was 3. My mom couldn't get a job and kept getting evicted, so my dad took my sister and me, and we moved back to my birthplace, Germany. 5 years later, we moved back to the States, and I re met my mom, who had remarried and had another kid. Throughout my youth, my sister and I were in constant back and forth custody battles. My mom was barely able to afford anything because she had never had a job, and my now ex stepfather, who I love and still talk to often, was working as a kitchen manager for a restaurant. They had another child, bringing the count to 4. She ended up moving into the basement, her bed right next to the computer, where she would wake up, play whatever games, and roll back into bed, like roll literally by this point. My brothers were like 6 and 10. They were in a private school, poverty scholarship, and my stepdad had moved to work in the interior redesigning field, including things like building walls, painting inside and outside, and a bunch of hard work. This is relevant because he would leave for work by 7 a.m. and get back by 7 p.m., he supervised. So when the kids weren't in school, they were free to run amok. My brothers had bad teeth. One had a speech impediment from lack of being pushed to read in school, not a birth or LD. One day I dropped by. I don't remember why, but I did. The kids were sitting in the living room in their school clothes, which were stained all over, holes in the pants, etc. I asked the older of the two what the hell was going on, and he said, "Mom is on strike." Mom is on strike? What the hell? I went down the stairs and felt like a parent talking to a 12-year-old who wouldn't listen. I did 2 loads of laundry for the kids and left. I called my stepdad. He was crying because he was just so exhausted when he got home, and he felt like it wasn't even a home anymore. She had begun talking with these dudes online from her games and said she no longer loved my stepfather. This was also going on, and I hadn't known. My stepdad ended up finding a lady willing to rent him a house cheaply if he would do work on it. That way, he was still paying bills for my mother and, of course, taking care of the boys. I had gotten laid off by this point and needed a place to stay for a couple of months. I went to my mom's and I hadn't been there in a couple of years. The house was wrecked. Dogs poop everywhere, dishes all over the place, etc. It was basically at the point where it should have been condemned. I put my bed in the extra room. I realized the first day that the AC was broken and it was June. Not just that, there was a fly infestation. It was bad, like very bad. I eventually moved out within like 2 months and she was kicked out right after. They got an apartment and I thought all was well now. Then she met a dude online who lived in DC. We lived in NC. Eventually, within a month, she dropped my brothers off at our great uncle's, not relatives, but growing up calling him uncle, and left for DC. Again, she had not gotten a job at all since she was 22, now in her 40s. She left my brothers and bounced. This is the second time she has done this to children. My stepdad found out a week later and went and got the boys. Except for my brother now being a grass-friendly 19-year-old skate kid who has not gotten a job, they've done much better. He did graduate, which surprised me. I wasn't sure if it would ever happen. My younger of the 2 brothers is a junior in high school, varsity wrestler, scholar, etc., doing really well. She still lives with this guy. He still doesn't work. What makes me even more mad is how I would see her on my siblings' statuses saying things like, "I raised you right and I'm so proud of you kids," and things of that nature, and my first thought was, what? I raised myself. She was very absent even when I was a kid. Eventually, she would try to make it a huge spectacle when she came into town. No one cared except my youngest brother, but he was a mama's boy. 2 years ago, I bought them both phones for Christmas to replace the old ones they had on the guy in DC's plan. I didn't cancel their lines. I paid full price so they could have them on their current service. She got pissed, threatened my brother, said some things to me, and I went off. I blew the hell up and told her I never wanted to hear from her again. She tried to contact me to this day, but it's been over a year, and I have stood my ground with resolve. She is not a mother. She never was and never will be. She's pathetic and the dirt beneath my shoes. Maybe she'll grow up one day and become a mom, but even then, I don't see the resolve from my end. I'm sure I can go on and on about other reasons or why it took me so many years to finally tell her enough is enough, but I did, and I feel great about it. Story 2. I was 45 years old. I made my weekly call to my mother, who then proceeded to tell me that she was having back surgery the next day, and none of my siblings were there to help her. This was not unusual because she had already alienated my 3 siblings. It was a Friday night, so I hung up and booked the first flight I could to her city. It cost me $800 because of the last-minute booking. I take the red-eye Saturday morning and make it to the hospital about 2 hours before she is scheduled to go into surgery. I walk into the hospital room, and the first words out of her mouth are how terrible I look. Again, this is not unusual. My mother never has a nice word to say about anyone. During the week she is in the hospital, I'm either there or at her house to help care for my disabled brother, not one of the three siblings from above. He got intoxicated and rolled his car off an embankment, resulting in brain damage 20 years prior to this. The accident that disabled him was his sixth major accident. For the other five, he started having accidents as soon as he got his license. My mother always made an excuse. The tire blew out, someone ran him off the road, the steering went out. My brother never drove a used car in his life. My parents got him a new car every other year or whenever he wrecked the old one. He could have had a life and recovered better from his accident, but my mother chose to keep him at home and helpless because she wanted his Social Security disability money. He was not required or allowed to take care of himself. She made his food, did his laundry, etc. He was kicked out of a health club she signed him up for. My mother claimed he just had trouble making it to the bathroom on time because of his medications, so he was peeing in a water fountain, not exposing himself. That made it okay. The day after my mother's surgery, I took my brother out to lunch. He drank a 32-ounce soda. Since I was aware of his incontinence problems, I asked him if he needed to use the restroom since we were going on a long drive. He said no. During the drive, I offered several times to stop so he could use the bathroom. Still no. FYI, he was not wearing adult diapers. Between the time it took to eat lunch and the drive, it was 4 hours with him not using the restroom. He did use it when we got home. For the week my mother was in the hospital, she continued to berate me about my looks, my husband, etc. I was used to this and just tried to ignore it. The day before I had to leave to go back to work, I made sure my mother got put in rehab because if they had sent her home, she would have followed the doctor's instructions. My brother could make himself food, etc. He just chose not to because he knew someone would do it for him. I'm at her house, packing and making sure my brother had everything he needs until my mother got home. I arranged to have one of my siblings look in on him. I'm standing in the living room, talking to my husband on the phone. My brother gets up from the recliner he lives in, walks 4 feet to the sliding glass door, unzips his pants, and pees onto the patio. I yelled at him to go to the damn bathroom. He claimed he couldn't make it in time. I asked him why he didn't use the urinal next to his chair, and his response was that our mother let him whiz on the patio, so why should I care? I tried talking to my mother about the situation. She again claimed he could not make it to the bathroom, even after I told her about the long drive. I went home. The next time I spoke to her on the phone, I tried talking to her about him again. She responded by attacking my husband, telling me I should leave him because he just manipulated me so I would do what he wanted. My husband is the most patient and kind man I have ever known. Also, I do what I want when I want. My husband is nothing but supportive even when he doesn't like my choices. That was the last straw. I told her I could no longer stand by and let her walk all over my life when she had essentially ruined my brother's life by enabling him. That was 12 years ago, and I've never been happier. My sister now takes care of my brother, and she is kind but no nonsense. Story 3. My father is in a nursing home in Florida. He has no idea who he is. I haven't spoken to him in 15 years, and I rarely think of him. I know it sounds harsh, but he chose this life. He had 7 kids with my mother and spent every year of their marriage intoxicated. When he would sober up enough, he would take jobs as a truck driver. He would leave town, and my mother would be stuck with little kids, no money, no car, and no food. I remember her telling me a story about feeding herself and her first 3 kids on a bag of potatoes for 2 weeks because there was nothing else to eat. She has also talked of living in a car or tent. He was a horrible man. The final straw for her was when he threw a full beer can at her in front of us and roughed her up. She never said so and I never spoke about it, but I also believe that she was scared that he might start hurting because I was 7 at the time she finally left him. He took our house, the only one I had ever known, and threw us out onto the streets. We lived in a shelter for several months until Mom managed to get us into a rental and start college. 4 years later, she had managed to get a degree to be an English teacher and keep us all on the straight and narrow, all by herself. She's my hero. She taught for several years and has now worked at a women's shelter, the very same one that saved us for the last 15 or so years. I continued to try to have a relationship with my father until I was 19 and finally realized it just wasn't worth it. The man was physically cruel for years, but I blamed it on the drinking problem. He brought home men and women in the middle of the night, and Mom would hide us upstairs where she thought we wouldn't see. He used all of our money for booze instead of food and clothes. He took away everything that we had. We literally had 3 hours to pack up a lifetime, and that was only because the policeman stood there in the front yard and wouldn't let him in while we packed. When I was 19, I tried to get him to come stay with me so I could help him, and he swore he would show up, but he just didn't. I was done at that point and will never speak to him again. All of the love that I could have given him has gone to my mom. She is the most amazing person on the planet. She has strength that I will never be able to understand, and I will never understand how she managed. She had 5 boys and 2 girls under the age of 16 when she finally left. She spent 5 years trying to divorce this man and dealing with his issues. The youngest two were twins in diapers, yet she got up every day and made sure we had clean clothes to wear to school. She made sure we were fed and cared for. She got on the dean's list every semester. She managed to support us with the tiny amount of child support that she got from his disability check each month and her student loans. We are all well rounded, normal adults, and it's all thanks to her. My husband and I will be married for 15 years this year, and it is because she taught us what a marriage should be and what it should not be. Everyone who is hearing this and who is in a similar situation, please let this be your example. It is possible to pull yourself up and break the cycle. You can change your life, no matter how bad it is. Making a child does not make you a parent. You have to deserve your child's love and respect, and she does. I would give her the moon and stars if I could. Mom will turn 62 this year and is still working at that shelter, answering the hotline on the night shift. She talks victims through their nightmares. She helps a mother and her small children run from a vicious boyfriend. She helps someone who was fiddled with make sense of their life. She drives a 15-year-old van and struggles to make ends meet. She still pays on those college loans and dotes on her grandchildren. I suspect she does it all with a Superman shirt under her sweater. He could have had it all, but he chose the bottle. She chose us, and I thank God every day that she did. All right, so if there's one line and one thought to remember from this story, it's this one. Making a child does not make you a parent. The father obviously isn't a parent, he's just the father, where the mother is probably the best parent in the universe. Thank God for women like her. While we're halfway through these stories, please do take a moment to show your support by smashing that like button and subscribing if you haven't already. It really does help me out. More heartbreaking narratives like these are on the way. Here's one from Story 4. My parents are very much divorced and hate each other, mostly due to my father's drinking problem. At 17, I joined the army to be less of a burden on my mother and get some kind of future going and served active time, joined the Guard, went to college, and got swept up in the ball of fun that happened after 9/11 with a few deployments. When I came home for the last time, I decided to reach out to my father, drove to his house, and thought we could have a decent conversation for once. Since it was early and he couldn't possibly be intoxicated before 10 a.m., I was wrong. I just looked at the ground and realized it was futile. A few years later, I met the girl of my dreams and got engaged. When I invited him to the wedding, there was no RSVP. I called him and asked if he got the invitation, and he said he did. I asked him if he was going to come with my grandmother, and he said he wasn't, which means Graham didn't have a ride. And when I asked why he wasn't coming, he told me, because we're not that close. I asked him how he expected to get closer to his son if he didn't want to come to my wedding or meet his new daughter, and he just hung up. And that was it. To be fair, my father is also a veteran and by all accounts got a little scrambled in Vietnam. But I told him when and if he decides to sober himself up, I'll be ready to pick up the phone. My new fear is that we're gearing up to attempt to have a kid, and my grandfathers both played such a huge element in my life that I don't quite understand what a childhood would be without one. But I remember being a young kid and being driven around by this guy who was beyond intoxicated, being roughed up in public for no reason, being taken fishing, which was fun in the morning but got horrible after the drinking took effect. I fear that when and if we have a kid, he will actively want to be in the kid's life, and the kid will be exposed to all the evils that I was exposed to. Story 5. My parents divorced when I was 3. Until my teenage years, I had regular contact with my dad, but it was pretty clear that he prioritized his new family. His second wife was insanely jealous and hated me. That's kind of hard to understand as a kid, so I just came out of it with a huge inferiority complex. After I moved away from home, I had a bitterness and resentment phase and broke off contact with my dad. That lasted for 10 plus years until my son was born. My dad started sending birthday and Christmas gifts, and I thought, oh, what the hell, he should see his grandchild. So I invited him over to stay for a couple of days. He had divorced again and was single. Well, he arrived and we had nothing to talk about. It was awkward. His luggage was a plastic bag full of wine bottles. When I got up the next morning, they were all empty. After he left, we just didn't talk again, and it's been 17 years. From what I hear, he's now married for the third time to a woman who shares his love for red wine, so I guess he's happy. Probably based on my life experience, I think blood relationships are overrated. There's nothing special about sharing the same genes. Find your quote unquote family among people who are there for you and appreciate you for who you are. I feel for you, OP. Like you said, based on your life experience, blood relationships can be overrated, but I think for a large majority of us, most of our blood relationships have been, at the very least, okay. At least based on my life experiences, blood relationships are not overrated. They're quite important. But then again, as they say, to each his own, so let's go ahead and move on to the next story. This is story 6. I was always torn between my parents after the divorce. I was about 9 at the time, and it seemed like even after that, they were always fighting. My emotional state was pretty bad for a couple of years after that. I eventually just kind of stopped talking to my dad. There was no particular reason, but he called on my birthday and stuff. By the time I turned 15, I was feeling much better about everything in my life and ended up saving my education because of it. There were a few things that happened in between graduation and Father's Day, but Father's Day was the last straw. He called me and asked if I wanted to come to his hometown for Father's Day, which I reluctantly agreed to because of what happened at graduation. Then he started to completely unprovoked bash my mom for at least 5 minutes straight. Every negative emotion I had when I was little, every struggle I had with my parents came back to life in those 5 minutes. And then I realized he caused literally all of them. He was manipulating me into believing my mom was the devil, and I almost bought into it. I hung up and haven't talked to him again since. It's been 4 years. Story 7. My parents split when I was 5. I moved to the States with my mom, but I used to visit my dad over the summer. He put me in summer camp, so I would really only see him after he picked me up and before he dropped me off. He used to rough me up, both physically and mentally. He was a foster kid who had cruel parents, so of course he carried on the tradition. When I was 10, things got intense and I almost did something horrible. My plan failed, and somehow he convinced the family it was all my fault. I was committed for 6 months. I was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, bipolar, and manic. No one believed my case. My dad was an amazing people person, as well as a con man, and had everyone convinced of his story, even me for a while. I haven't seen him since I was 10. My mom is on her 5th divorce. She owes me thousands of dollars, which I gave up on years ago. She is still on substances, booze, cigarettes, and job hops like no other. She is also a great people person and somehow gets everyone to feel sorry for her. Her negativity is a gaping black hole that will suck you in. I can't be around her. Despite living in the same city, I haven't seen her for about 5 years. I have 2 sisters, same mom, who saw things for what they were up until a few years ago. Now the sisters have written me off as the bad sheep and they continue to see my mother. I never see my nephews or nieces, and that stinks. I was kicked out of the house when I was 14. I was homeless but managed to hop around from friend to friend for at least a place to stay. When I was 15, I was adopted. Basically, my best friend's mom took me in, and it was awesome. More family than my family. I had 2 new brothers, a new sister, and a great mom for years. This lasted for years. For about the past 3 or 4 years, we have been in less and less contact. The older brother moved away to the army. The younger brother moved into his own place, got married, and had a kid. The younger sister got married and moved to her own place. I kept trying, inviting myself over, inviting them over, having barbecues, etc. Every event became less frequent and the excuses kept growing. Now it's a shocker to get a Facebook message. I don't blame them. I'm not family. The younger brother's wife reminds me of it every time I see her. It makes things hard. And there you have it. I hope you found these stories eye-opening. If you're curious about more strained parent-child relationships, go watch the next one. What's the worst strict parents ever? Story 2 is extreme. I'll see you there, and thank you for watching this one.